Hi, this is Sean Kuhn, and I'm here to talk about the future of biomedical informatics. I really like this topic because, one, there's a lot of interesting things coming in the future, and two, I can talk about the future and nobody's going to know whether I'm wrong or not for years to come. And I think a lot of people are interested in this because they're wondering how we're going to manage the escalating costs in healthcare and a lot of other challenges, and how will technology and information be involved with that. But for us, in informatics, I think we have a very different question. And our question is, what should we be thinking about now to be better prepared for the future? And I thought about this, because how do you answer a question like that? And I started by reviewing JAMIA and NAHIMA articles that summarized a lot of current trends. And this kind of gave a landscape of what people are working on and sort of what's fresh and up and coming. But then I realized that this is general knowledge. These are things that many of us already know about. So what could we do to actually take this a step further? And that's what brought me to the idea of disruptive innovation, which is what I want to talk about today. So today we want to explore the concept of disruptive innovation, contrast it with something we're going to call incremental innovation, and then talk about why this concept is important in health informatics. And we're going to propose 3 disruptive trends and give examples. And basically all of this is about the idea of how can I make sure that the work that I'm doing now is still relevant in the future. So in talking about disruptive innovations, it's often helpful to start with its counterpart, which we'll call incremental innovation. And these often can come from a focus on continuous improvement and can use process improvement tools to drive this forward. But these incremental innovations have the benefit of established structures. For example, let's say you've got a brilliant idea for a new way to create a database. Well, there's going to be somebody that's sort of in charge of databases and some sort of budget and some sort of structures, policies, and standards that are already there to support that process. So these are a list of things that are definitely up and coming in informatics. We're going to have improvements in interoperability. Hopefully in privacy and security, we'll develop better threat management. We have dashboards, but we also have science of usability, and we can improve those things so that there's more attention to the human factors. So there's lots of different areas of work that is getting better and better. And when we're talking about disruptive innovation, we're not saying that it's more important or even more creative than all the innovations happening here. The key is that it can change the way we think about our work in all these other areas. So what is it? It's not well defined in literature. Typically articles on this are about the marketplace and trying to figure out which product is going to disrupt the marketplace next, so you can know what to invest in. But they do note a key feature that it's often a lower quality product that has another benefit. So if you take, for example, MP3 audio files, well, these are much lower quality than a compact disc or even a record, but they have the value of being very compact and portable. And so that was a disruptive technology. It doesn't fit well into the established structures. And so you have a situation where people are trying to figure out, well, how do we charge for this? And then Napster is developed, and people are sort of stealing these, and created a lot of challenge to our typical process of music ownership. So disruptive innovation often solves important problems, but it can create new ones along the way. However, for this talk, we're really interested in innovation that's disruptive to healthcare in our informatics work. So how can you tell if an innovation is going to be disruptive? So Nagy and others state that you can tell if, one, that innovation involves a central aspect of our work, and two, if there's a new capability, a new process, or some form of new ownership. So if we take something like telemedicine and we say, wow, that is definitely central to our main work. It's patient care, patient visits. And it involves a new capability. You're doing something at a distance. It involves a new process. You're using different types of technology and different processes. And it may even involve new ownership because often the patients may use their own device. So with telehealth, you can see something that is very useful, and it's proving to be useful in a number of ways, but it's also disruptive. People are scrambling to figure out how to bill for this. What should standards be? How do you deal with the fragmentation created by telehealth visits? And so on. So the interesting thing about disruptive innovation, unfortunately, is it's usually identified after it happens. Well, that's not helpful. So how can we tell what's going to be next in terms of disruptive innovation? And I thought, well, instead of trying to guess what the next disruptive innovation is going to be, what if we tried to guess what sorts of trends might give us a clue? And so I came up with these. So I'm going to propose 3 disruptive trends for the future. Things that were once infrequent and episodic will become more frequent and continuous. We'll talk about the flow of medical knowledge, which is changing from unidirectional to multidirectional. And we're moving into a more specific, more precise, and individualized world of medicine. Trend 1, episodic to continuous. So go back in time with me to a time where there were things called telephones and post offices. And ask yourself, did I ever take a picture of my dessert, rush to the post office, mail it to all of my friends, call them on the phone and say, what did you think about my dessert? And of course, we do this all the time in social media. So you can see how making communication more convenient makes it happen more often. And that's what we see in medicine right now, where in the VA there was 2 million telehealth visits just in 2016. And Kaiser predicts that by 2017 they'll have more telehealth visits than regular visits. So you see a trend away from the annual physical to something that's happening more continuously. AHIMA suggests that by 2017, 1.7 billion people will have downloaded a health app, hopefully one that one of you invented. And you can see how this is an opportunity for data to be more continuously entered into the patient health record. And this also fits another trend, which is the chronic disease epidemic, where just in the US, 140 million people have a chronic disease, and those people constitute 80% of healthcare expenditures. So very good reason to have more continuous monitoring and patient-provider interactions. But it's not just those interactions, it's actually the knowledge resources. So go back in time with me again and imagine a physician who's seeing a patient and is stumped. So she leaves the room, she goes to her office, she pulls off a textbook from medical school from 5 years ago and looks up the answer. And if it's a medication question, she might pull off the physician's desk reference, which is updated yearly. So you can see that times have really changed. And now information is updated in our continuous learning system very frequently, to the point where patients often have more up-to-date information about their own condition than their providers might. So definitely a change in the way we're updating our knowledge resources. And this is all disruptive. It creates a lot of questions about standards, how to summarize all this information, who will be responsible for all of this information. Trend 2, unidirectional to multidirectional. So in a traditional format, knowledge comes from randomized controlled trials. They're formalized into guidelines, And physicians use that to deliver treatment plans for patients and do patient education. I'm proposing that there will be a trend towards more multi-directional flow of information. So now we have patient communities like patients like me that are collecting all sorts of information about patients, their experiences with treatments, side effects, and so on. And if you go on the internet and search for a medical condition, 70 to 80% of the time, Wikipedia will show up as one of the top 10 findings. However, Wikipedia, of its 14,000 medical-related articles, they only consider 50 of those to be of high quality. So that's interesting. However, on the other hand, if you compare Wikipedia's listings of drug information with something like Medscape, you'll find that it's actually very, very accurate. So there's different directions that information is coming from. And it's not just medical knowledge, but it's actually data about the patients themselves. We already mentioned that you can have these electronic data capture tools, personal monitoring devices, as another way for data to come basically from another direction and enter the medical record. And patients are able to more and more enter information into the record directly, either through emails, which often end up in the medical record, or interactions with nursing staff, or entering information directly into the health record. And of course now, with big data and predictive analytics, we have not only the data that we collected, but we have the data that we predict from the data that we collected. So you see a lot of different sources for information and a lot of opportunity for those sources to conflict. So how do we reconcile those conflicts, and what does evidence-based medicine look like in the future? So trend 3, general to specific. So we hear a lot about precision medicine and genomics and the metabolome, and there's also behavioral data, environmental data, quantified self data. There's lots of ways to get more and more precise information about individual patients. And not just that, in our learning healthcare system, we have these bigger and bigger data sets that allow us to look at smaller and smaller subgroups, more specific. And then there's this other thing called patient-centered outcomes, where all along we thought we were doing what was best for patients, but we forgot to ask the patients. And there's a trend to change that. So we're trying to have more research that looks at quality of life or patient preferences, or even involves the patients in developing the research itself and helping to choose what the outcomes of interest are going to be, because we're trying to align those outcomes with the patient values. So you see this whole trend of getting more and more specific information about patients, and then getting more and more specific treatment plans that fit both their preferences as well as their particular body. So to summarize, I'm proposing 3 disruptive trends. 1, a trend from episodic to continuous, whether that involves patient care or knowledge implementation or other things. I'm suggesting that information that used to come from sort of a single pathway will begin to come from multiple sources and move in multiple directions. And I'm also suggesting that treatment is becoming more specific and more individualized, not just to a patient's body, but to their circumstance and their personal preferences. So that brings me back to the question, what should we be thinking about now to make sure that the work we're doing now is relevant in the future? So take an example like decision support. Let's say I'm building a decision support tool based on clinical guidelines. How does my strategy change when I realize that knowledge will be updated on a more frequent basis? Can my tool accommodate that? Or what if I'm considering the multiple directions that information might be coming from? Am I considering environmental information, predictive data? Can my tool accommodate that? And in terms of being more specific and individualized, am I considering precision data? And can my tool take into account patient preferences? Now, something like NLP you might think might be immune to all these trends, but consider this. What if you're building your NLP tool on a corpus of mostly medical notes from nurses and physicians, only to later find that the chart of the future has lots of entries that come directly from patients, right? So that may change the way you want to train your NLP tool, depending on what you're imagining that future medical record to look like, right? So there's a number of different things that we're working on in informatics, but it is interesting to sort of run them through these three trends and see how that might change the way we look at that work. So to conclude, there's lots of exciting opportunities in informatics. I think that disruptive innovations are important because they might impact our other efforts. And I've mentioned a few trends that I thought may occur, but maybe you can think of some other trends, maybe some other more impactful ones. And wrap that all up into a question of how can we use this information or understanding of disruptive trends to plan our work for the future. So thanks for listening to this talk, and here's some references.